Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Millennial in the Middle. If you're watching this on YouTube right now and not listening to it on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcast, you probably noticed that I'm in my car right now, which is probably making you wonder why. I wanted to make a push to get this episode out on September 11th. So I'm filming this intro to quickly get it out to you same day. It's September 11th, 19 years since the World Trade Center was attacked. Our country was attacked on our homeland for the first time since World War II in Pearl Harbor. And I think for a lot of us, we all remember where we were that day. If you're a millennial, it may be one of those only times that you remember where you were. You know, baby boomers, they remember where they were when JFK was shot or when the Challenger exploded for our Gen Xers. But I think for everyone listening to this podcast, you probably remember that day. And so I want to put out this interview today as a tribute in memory to never forgetting what happened that day. But we're going to do this in a little different way. We're not going to talk about the September 11th attacks. We're going to talk about the war on terror. And I've got a guest on that was deployed in Afghanistan in 2006. And when it comes to the war on terror, or really the Middle East over the last several years, I think it's easy to kind of get it all confused. We were in Iraq, and I know that was about Saddam Hussein, and then we were in Afghanistan, and there was that Osama Bin Laden guy and Al-Qaeda, and now all you really know about the Middle East is that it's a mess, right? And I think it's really important to remember and recognize those men and women who went overseas and were involved in the war on terror. And so the guest that we have today is one of those individuals. His story is unique because he went in a pretty interesting capacity. He was a JAG, which we'll talk about in just a minute. If you don't know what that is, hang on like 2 seconds. We'll explain that. But as an attorney in the military, he actually had the chance in Afghanistan to mentor, train, and teach Afghans how to have law and order, how to put in place a criminal justice system that was going to be fair and equal and provide justice to those seeking it, and really, in a lot of ways, teaching this country democracy. This is a very, very unique interview, a very unique perspective, and a cool story. I want to tell you, make sure to listen to this episode until the very end. At the end, I asked him the question. I said, did you feel like you were wasting your time there? Did you feel like what you did there actually made an impact? And by way of a teaser right now, I'll tell you that the answer that he gives, and more importantly, the story that he tells in response to that, is truly moving, it's touching, and a great reminder of how blessed we all are to live in this country and what we can do for the rest of the world with a lot of the, blessings and things that we have been given. So on September 11th, I hope you all benefit from an extra dose of patriotism today. I know we're coming off the national anthem episode, which if you haven't listened to, go back and listen to that for another dose of that healthy patriotism. But I think you're going to catch that today. The last thing I'll say before I introduce Rob Church and bring him on is thank you to the troops. Thank you to all of those who, whether you're in the military currently in active duty or you have served at some point in your life, whether that be here in the country or overseas, thank you for your service. And thank you to the service of those military families, to your wives, to your husbands, to your children that support you in your service. Thank you. So enjoy this episode. This is Bob Church. I've had the chance to get to know him for a little while now, but just recently heard this story. And the minute I did, I wanted to share it with you. Enjoy. Here I am, stuck in the middle with you. All right, Bob Church, thanks for being with us here today.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it. I'm so excited. I've heard this story, and I'm so excited to share it with everyone else and kind of benefit from your experiences, your perspective. It's unique. And I think there's a lot to gain from what we'll discuss today. So let's jump right into this. Tell me a little bit about your career, your background, what you've done.
Okay, so I'm the director of the Utah Prosecution Council right now. I train prosecutors, but that's not what we're here to talk about.
Yeah.
Right out of law school, I was commissioned in the United States Navy. I served active duty for 3.5 years.
Okay.
Was stationed in Norfolk, Virginia. Came back to Utah. I was hired by Orem City, worked for them for 18 years as their chief prosecuting attorney, and at the same time was in the Utah National Guard. And I'm still in the Utah National Guard, full-bird colonel, state military judge. So I have been a civilian attorney as well as a military attorney throughout my entire career.
Okay, so we have a military judge, a colonel, and that word of a JAG.
JAG.
So I want to do this. We talk about some of these phrases, and often I like to kind of do almost like a glossary or some definitions at the start, right?
Yeah.
Especially as we do this so we kind of know what to refer back to. So let's first start with the fun one. I remember my parents watching the TV show JAG.
Yeah.
I actually looked up today, 1995 to 2005, 10 seasons. It's the spinoff of NCIS.
Yeah.
The millennials maybe know that one. But so tell me, what is a JAG other than a cool TV show?
Which I never saw.
Okay.
Yeah, no, JAG stands for Judge Advocate General.
Okay.
So that is the core that all military attorneys belong to. So whether you're an Army JAG, Navy, Air Force, Marine, Coast Guard JAG, that means that you are a military attorney.
Okay. That's pretty simple.
Yeah.
All right. So you're a military attorney. Tell me about the National Guard. I think we know what that is. Explain it a little more.
Sure. So because I'm now in the Army side, I'm going to refer to the Army. So we call the active duty Army, we call them Big Army.
Okay.
So Big Army is full-time active duty federal employees, essentially. The National Guard is a reserve unit of the federal Army, but we serve a dual mission. We can be federally activated, such as when I was activated and went to Afghanistan, I became an active duty federal employee, essentially, whereas traditionally what guardsmen are is we wear the uniform, but we work for the governor of whatever state we live in. So our units are in the state, we work for the state, we can be activated for state missions. Natural disaster relief, things like that. For the Olympics, we're all activated for the Olympics.
Okay. We've heard about that recently with the riots,
Yes,
right?
yes.
So if you're listening to the news, you hear the governor the governor had to activate the National Guard. That's what they're talking about.
Yes.
Okay. So the National Guard, and then you talk a little bit too about the Army Reserves.
Sure.
What's that?
Yeah. So the reserves are the reserve component of the Big Army. So reservists are still federal employees. But unlike the Guard, they are assigned to whatever unit, whatever military specialty they belong to, and that unit may be outside of the state where you live.
Okay.
And they're basically federal employees, whereas we are state employees. Is probably the simplest way to look at it.
Yeah. And if we go to war, they're like the first ones to go,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
Okay.
Right.
All right, so that helps. We got a few terms out of there. Any terms I missed or anything else we should talk about?
No, I think we're good.
Okay. Well, let's do this now. So tell me, what in your upbringing, did you grow up really patriotic? Did you always want to be in the military? What was that all about?
Yeah, I was certainly not a 12-year-old that asked for a picture of George Washington kneeling in Valley Forge.
Hey, you've been listening to the podcast. All right.
I have. Got to get a plug in there. No, I mean, I didn't consider myself, looking back, overly patriotic. I mean, I was an Eagle Scout, stood for the national anthem, loved that, loved all of that. But I didn't really consider myself overly patriotic. I mean, registered for selective service, voted when I was 18, all of that.
Yeah.
But it wasn't until I commissioned in the Navy and put on my uniform for the first time that it really kind of clicked.
Yeah.
And it was and that's when it, I guess my patriotism went into high gear.
Yeah.
Because depending upon which uniform I was in, I had the flag on my shoulder, or I had, the emblems of our country somewhere on my uniform.
Yeah.
And that really connected with me.
Yeah. I think anytime you get to feel a part of something bigger than yourself.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's that. And I mean, I think what you explained right there, right? You were not only representing Bob Church, representing America, right?
Yeah.
And man, that's so cool. So you go to law school, and then what makes you decide, let's go the JAG route?
Oh, that's a great question. Because I went to law school not with the intention of coming out a naval officer.
Yeah.
But two of my professors, my evidence professor was a retired naval judge, career in the Navy, and he talked to us about one that I remember specifically was negotiating a Soviet-U.S. naval treaty very early on in his career, which just fascinated me. So it had aspects of international law.
Interesting.
Yeah. And then...
That's high stakes law right there.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, it's, if I recall correctly, it was one of the first ones, after the Cold War or, during the Cold War. But I remember just sitting in class, just being fascinated by what he had to say. And then my trial practice teacher was just recently retired full time. And to hear the stories that he would tell, the different court martials they would do, or, when you're a military attorney, you do just about everything. And just listening to his stories, I was fascinated by that and thought this would be an awesome experience.
Yeah.
And so I looked into the JAG Corps, contacted the naval base or the legal office in San Diego, and was able to go out and spend some time with them and see what they did. And that made me think, no, this is what I want to do. And so I commissioned my second year of law school.
Yeah. I think that's cool how that rubs off. I mean, I grew up in Utah. I've lived in San Diego for a little bit, right? We made this connection, and there's so much military in San Diego, right? Between Camp Pendleton, MCRD, Coronado Island, right? Like, there's a lot of military there, and it starts to rub off of that. People in the military all have some similar characteristics, right? And so I can see that. If you're out there in law school and you're like, I want to be like that guy. And so tell me about your early career then as a JAG.
Okay. So I was stationed in Norfolk, Virginia, at the legal office, and my first duty assignment was doing what we call legal assistance, just helping service members, wills, powers of attorney, trusts, landlord disputes. And I was actually thinking about this as we drove over. Didn't tell you this when we met, but one of my very first clients was this old white-haired guy with his wife, and they came in and I did their will for him. And as I was waiting for my assistant to print up the paperwork so we could notarize the will, I just asked him, tell me about your career. And he was a Marine. Mm-hmm. And have you seen A Few Good Men? Or not A Few Good Men. That's a movie too, but I've seen that one.
I Can Handle the Truth.
No, exactly. Saving Private Ryan.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. He was on one of those troop transports.
On D-Day.
On D-Day. Stormed the beach at Normandy. And I still get chills thinking about it, as he said that as they were approaching the beach, they knew that the gunners were up on the bluff. And when that tailgate, for lack of a better term, dropped and the bullets started, being fired at him, he said it was by the grace of God that he survived, because he said the Marine on his right, the Marine on his left were gunned down, and somehow he survived and made it up to the beach.
Wow.
So that was my first really cool experience as a naval JAG officer.
Yeah.
And then just got to do other amazing things. Got to go to Iceland twice on a case. I was defense counsel.
Yeah.
I walked onto the U.S. aircraft carrier George Washington to do some administrative hearings, doing some legal stuff. And so walked on, and we sailed up and down the Virginia coastline for, I was only on board for 6 days, but they continued up and down the coastline. Doing maneuvers and practicing things. And one day I was able to go up on the Admiral's Bridge, and we watched the touch and goes, the jets coming in, come down, get the tail hook, stop, and then they're jettisoned off the end of the
What was
runway.
that like?
I
can't, I'm getting my heart's beating fast just talking about it.
It's, they're obviously very skilled, very qualified, but as they're coming down, you see the guys on the deck scatter because they cannot have anybody on the deck when the plane comes in or when it takes off because, getting sucked in and the danger. And you see that tail or the wire that's sitting there on the deck waiting for the plane to come down, and it drops its tail hook. It's a hook that hooks the wire and stops them and jolts them. It's awesome. It's in the movies, it's one thing, and on TV, but, to actually be there, be less than, 50 yards from where they're doing this was incredible.
Oh, that's cool.
And then when the planes take off, they're catapulted off the end of the runway. And, you see this. Go back and watch a movie, watch your favorite YouTube, whatever. as the plane goes off the end of the runway, it dips just a little bit, as the engines accelerate and the plane goes off. And I remember thinking, oh, okay, watching that. I knew that the next day or two I was going to be flown off in a mail carrier. And thought this is going to be really awesome. So I get in and I'm seated backwards. So I'm, traveling backwards down the ramp, and, they counted down, and all of a sudden, there's this incredible force of that catapult throwing you out the end of the plane. And even though I knew this was going to happen, when that plane dipped, however, few feet it is for a split second, I thought, we are going in. We're going in the drink. And the George Washington cannot turn in time. Yeah. We're going to be run over and we're going to be drowned. And it was, beads of sweat, everything. And then it was over, and then we flew in and landed in Norfolk, and it was cool. But that was another incredible experience.
Yeah.
Just the beginning of my career.
Man, that's so cool. That story you told about the Marine that was there at D-Day, how cool that you were able to serve him. That there he's sitting with his wife, 50, however long later it was, having that experience to be able to help them then write their will, and the soldier on the right and the left didn't get that opportunity.
Yeah.
And so you end up leaving active duty. Mm-hmm. And so what came next?
So we missed being away from home. I grew up in Spokane, Washington.
Yeah.
My wife is here from Utah. And I missed the snow skiing and southern Utah. And so decided that we would come back to Utah. I wasn't ready to give up my uniform. And so I looked into the Naval Reserve, but they didn't have a JAG slot in the reserve unit here for a JAG officer. Well, they did, but it wasn't a good fit for me. And so I remembered driving past the point of the mountain where the National Guard headquarters is. And they used to have the old, it was either Korean or Vietnam era jet up on the podium in front of the building. And so I remembered that. And so I called a recruiter, and the Utah National Guard was hiring. And so they hired me. So I traded in my Navy blues for my Army greens.
Yeah. Is there as much, like in the movies, you see this competition between the two? Was that a big move?
Uh-huh.
Okay, you got some crap for that then. Like Navy guy now is an Army guy?
I did, absolutely. I would be sitting in briefings, and the military is known for its acronyms. JAG, Judge Advocate General. And I would have to lean to my neighbor, and I would say, okay, I understand the concept, but I don't know what that term means. And sometimes they would make fun of me, oh, you're just a Navy guy. Other times they would say, yeah, I don't know what it is either. So,
just keep saying, no one better ask, right?
Yeah.
So tell me then, so you start serving the National Guard, and where I want to focus today, where I think we've really, touched on, is your deployment into Afghanistan, right? Yeah. So tell me a little bit about what were you doing at the time when you found out about that? How did that come about?
Sure. So as a JAG officer, we get assigned to basically all of the major comms, MACOM, here in the state. And at the time, this would have been in January of 2006. I was assigned to or attached to 1st Corps Artillery. That's the unit that shoots the big guns and the cannons and whatnot. And every January, we would go over and for 15 days and do war games with the Japanese military. 1st Corps was commanded by a 1-star general, so I'm on the 1-star general staff. And so I'm kind of privy to what's going on behind the scenes. And we had been there just a couple of days when I started hearing some of my counterparts on the staff start whispering about deployment in Afghanistan. And so I got the general, one afternoon we were just talking, and I said, so sir, I'm hearing a rumor that we may be getting deployed. And I just kind of looked at him, the question, and I didn't ask the question, and he just said, yeah, we're going to be deployed in June. So, here I am away from home, 15 days, just a couple of days into this. And so I've got, the rest of this exercise to be thinking about, okay, in less than 6 months, I'm going to be leaving. And at the time, it was about a 15-month deployment, be 3 months of training, and then 12 months in country. And so that's all I thought about the rest of that exercise was getting deployed in the coming summer. But ironically, I felt really peaceful about it. I just have this abiding faith and trust in God. And I think he just told me from the very beginning that everything would be okay.
Yeah.
Not that I would come home necessarily, but that everything would be okay. And so even though, it was scary and exciting and all of that, I just felt really peaceful about it.
Yeah. That's pretty cool. And you were in the military, but you really felt more like a civilian, right?
Absolutely.
And you didn't even go to typical boot camp, right?
No. So as a naval officer, this is back then. For anybody that joins now, it's different.
Yeah.
But when I went through, we called it knife and fork school. The officer candidate school is what it was called. We learned how to march. We learned how to wear a uniform. We learned about, just some of the major things about the Navy and how to be an officer. But it wasn't until I was later in my career that I ever fired a weapon.
Wow.
So yeah, I had not had any of that experience. I'd never driven a Humvee before I got deployed because I wasn't assigned one. I always had a Land Cruiser or something else, but I'd never driven a Humvee. Yeah. Until I got deployed to Afghanistan.
So you come home,
Yeah.
you're on this 3-week, little trip, and then all of a sudden you're about to tell your family that it's about to be a 15-month. If you thought 3 weeks was long, 15 months. Yeah. How did your family take that? What was going through your mind?
Yeah, so I knew I couldn't delay telling my wife, Janae. So I got home, hadn't even unpacked, it was still in my uniform, and I went in the bedroom and we sat on the end of the bed, and I said, honey, I've got something to tell you. And she was just looking at me, and I said, I'm going to be deployed this summer. And she said, I know. While I was gone, and during her own personal worship, God spoke to her. Or she was praying, and she said, thank you for taking care of me and the boys while Bob's gone. And he whispered to her and said, I'm just, getting you ready for when he leaves and when he gets deployed. So it wasn't news to her, it wasn't a shock to her. And it was the same thing as she just felt this incredible feeling of peace and calm, and that just helped us get through those next, 5 months as I got ready to deploy. I just felt that the entire time, that everything would be okay. It's like I said, I wasn't told that you would come home necessarily, but that everything would be okay.
That's incredible. Or that feeling of being comforted and strengthened, and for her to say, I know.
Yeah, I know. That was not what I was expecting.
Yeah. Here you were ready for this big conversation, and it had already been had. And so, anticipation of 5 months. Mm-hmm. It's coming. Yeah. You go then to, it wouldn't be boot camp now. What is it called?
Just our pre-deployment training.
Okay.
Yeah. So that was in Hattiesburg, Mississippi. Okay. Just outside, Camp Shelby, just outside of Hattiesburg, Mississippi. We were there for the wonderful months of June, July, and August.
Oh, great time of year in Mississippi. Yeah.
Yeah. I lived in the Dominican Republic for a while, and lived in Virginia, and I thought the humidity was bad there, but man, it was, as I remember, it was particularly bad that summer, but it was hot and humid the entire time we were there. Yeah.
And so you're like firing a gun for the first time and learning how to be a soldier.
Exactly.
And hey, you're the old guy too, right? I mean, comparatively, how old were you?
Yeah, let's see, it's 14 years ago, so I'm 57, so what's that, 43?
43? Okay.
And we had an older command because we were a command element. Yeah. And so there were guys that were older than I was. We had grandfathers that deployed with us. And so, we did everything. We learned how to be Army soldiers, drive a Humvee, land navigation. I am embarrassed to say I cannot navigate a map to save my life. And
They don't have Google Maps in Afghanistan?
No. And I remember it was my turn on the map, and I got us 1.5 miles away from where we were supposed to be. I could see where we were supposed to be. I just couldn't get us there. That's how bad it was. Yeah. But learning to shoot my 9mm pistol. That's what I carried all the time in country. I was assigned an M4, learning that. 50 cal. The crew-served weapons that go up on the Humvees, throwing grenades, doing live fire exercises, clearing buildings, crawling through the mud, crawling under barbed wire, climbing over 10-foot wall or 10-foot high walls. There was one day that it was so hot, and this is gross, that the perspiration, had trickled down into my boots, and I could feel the sweat just sloshing around in the bottom of my boots. It was, I had perspired that much. I think I lost 10 pounds during those 3 months we were there.
So, did you feel ready?
Actually, we really did. The Army, they do a really good job. I mean, they put us through every kind of scenario that they anticipated. Roadside bombs, like I said, clearing buildings, sniper fire. And so, I felt for, not knowing anything going in, about that aspect of the Army, because I was really isolated being the JAG officer.
Yeah.
And so I felt like I was really prepared. I mean, I knew things were going to happen that you just can't prepare for. But I did. I felt pretty good.
That's awesome. So tell me this. We're going to call a quick timeout right now, right? You're about to head to Afghanistan, but I'll be real with you. Like, when it comes to the Middle East, I think Americans know that it's a mess. Yeah. We know that we have people over there. What are they doing? I'm not quite sure. Like, for maybe a lot of people listening to the podcast, we know about 9/11. Yeah. We know about Iraq and then Afghanistan. It all just kind of blends together. So really, what were we even doing there?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, we had the war in Iraq with, Hussein. Then 9/11 happened, and we, quickly realized that Bin Laden and Al-Qaeda, his terrorist group, were behind this. And at the time, Afghanistan was ruled by the Taliban, which was an extremist organization. And Al-Qaeda had a stronghold in Afghanistan. And so after President Bush declared war on, Al-Qaeda, Bin Laden, and his cells, that's when the U.S. was part of a multinational coalition that went into Afghanistan in October of 2001. And the goal was to root out Al-Qaeda, find Bin Laden if we could, get rid of the Taliban, because women couldn't go to school, they persecuted. I mean, it was just a terrible, terrible condition to live under. And so we went in trying to restore what the Afghans had many, many decades ago, was a sense of freedom. Yeah.
So, I mean, honestly, the description of the war on terror is really a good description of that.
Right.
And so you go over there. Now tell me, you personally, what was that like? What were you doing? What's a military, advocate, general attorney doing over there?
Yeah. So I mentored.
Okay.
I got to train. And I was really lucky. Let me back up. 6 months before we went, so this would have been, the January of 2006, the end of 2005, is the Afghan military had just adopted a new military code of justice. And it was the Americans that helped write it. So they'd had 6 months of using this code of justice.
Like a constitution?
Well,
Can we call it that?
It's like statute. Like,
okay. Laws,
the criminal law, essentially.
Got it.
Yeah. So I got there, and I mentored 3 military judges. I mentored prosecuting attorneys. I mentored defense attorneys. And I mentored the police investigators. And when I use the term attorney, I use that really loosely because there was only one Afghan JAG officer that actually had gone to law school. He had been handpicked by the Soviets when the Soviet occupied Afghanistan and sent him to go to law school in Russia. So when I say the military attorneys, they were just appointed to that job, but they had no legal training. And so that...
You're an attorney now.
Exactly.
Yes.
And so that, that's what made it really interesting, is not only was I helping them understand this new military code, these new statutes, these new rules, but I was helping them to be advocates, because they didn't know how to do that.
Yeah.
And at times it presented a conflict because they were prosecuting somebody, and we'll talk about that case in just a second. But I was having to advise the prosecutors, how do you present a case? What do you do here? But at the same time, talking to the defense attorneys, here's how you defend a case, and trying to be as neutral as I could.
Yeah.
And then at the same time, advising the judges on, this is your new role. In their previous system under Soviet law, is the judges acted basically as the prosecutor themselves. They directed the investigation, they directed what evidence would be gathered, they basically told the prosecutor what to do. And so under the new system is it was like, yeah, there's a presumption of innocence. And no, the judges don't get to be involved in directing the cases. And that was really hard for them. Yeah. I had to keep telling them, no, you don't get to look at the case file. You have to wait until the prosecutor presents, the evidence, and then you rule on the evidence that's being presented. And it would be, oh, but Colonel Church, but we need to. And I'm like, but you don't, that's changed. You don't get to do that anymore.
Yeah.
And then I told them, and if the prosecutor doesn't present enough evidence, you have to find him guilty. Oh, well, we can't do that. And I'm like, well, yeah, that's the way your system is.
You mean find him innocent?
Sorry.
Yes, I got it. Yes.
Yeah.
Like that's what they were doing before, right?
Yeah, they were all guilty. I mean,
assumption of guilt.
Exactly.
Yeah. They don't speak English. No, Bob, how'd that work?
So I was lucky. I had a U.S. citizen who was Afghan by birth. His family emigrated to the States in the 80s. But he had a top secret clearance because not only was he my interpreter, secret clearance, he was my interpreter. He interpreted for my boss. So he spoke fluent English and came over and interpreted. And so it was awesome. In fact, because of his U.S. citizenship and his security clearance, he actually just lived across the hall from me in this hut building we lived in.
Wow. I've spoken to audiences out of the country with translators before. I spoke in Vietnam and it was translated in like six different languages with headsets. It's the hardest thing I've ever done.
Oh, absolutely.
I couldn't imagine trying to have conversations like that in this three-way telephone.
Well, and it was weird at first because, coming from prosecuting, I speak Spanish and a lot of interpretation that goes on in courts is Spanish. And so I'm used to understanding the question being asked in Spanish and the answer coming back to me in Spanish and letting the interpreter then tell me in English. And so it was really hard to not know that other half of the conversation. Oh, man.
Okay, so let's hear a story or two. Okay. Like anything that stood out to you.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we first got there, the unit that we were replacing, they said, you have to watch out for this one-star general. His name's Akhtar. He was the deputy to the two-star general on the base that we lived. They said, he is evil. He steals from his soldiers. He rapes his soldiers. One thing, I don't know if you're listening.
He rapes his soldiers.
Yeah, and it's not a sexual thing. It's about power and control. If you are the rapist, it's no big deal. But if you're the victim, it's a lifetime of shame. And it's just a twisted, sick mentality. But, these are the kinds of things that he would do. He was also in the most important tribe, the ruling tribe, if you will. And that's another reason that he could do what he did. And so we were told we need to watch out for this guy. And so for the first couple of months we were there, we were observing or would hear all of these horrific things that he would do to his soldiers. But the commander and my counterpart, they were too afraid to do anything against him. Until finally one day he assaulted one of his soldiers, and some of our soldiers, our guard guys, saw it, and we were able to pressure the two-star general into commencing legal proceedings against this General Akhtar. And so I was prepping my counterpart, telling him, okay, under your new criminal code, here's what you do. And it's similar to our Miranda rights. I walked him through it. I says, you advise him, here's what you're accused of. These are your rights. Do you have anything to say? It can be used against you. And then I said, and you need to tell him that you're taking him into pretrial confinement. Basically, you're putting him in jail. And I could tell as I'm talking with my counterpart that this was not sitting really well with him. He was nervous about it. And so again, I walked through, here's what you say. And so I said, okay, the ball is now in your court. And I knew the next day in the morning, they would be having this meeting, if you will. The two-star general was going to bring Akhtar in, the one-star general, and my counterpart was going to advise him of his rights, and they're going to take him in custody, and we were going to begin this court-martial proceeding. I guess I wasn't really surprised. I got a phone call. And I was working on a base just about 10 kilometers away, saying, Colonel Church, things are not going well. You need to come back. And so my legal assistant and I got in our Humvee. went to the general's office, and he was up on the second floor, and as we walked up the stairs, I saw some of my guard guys, and they had their M4s and M14s at the lower ready with their fingers on the trigger. Oh. And I knew that things were really bad. And as I got up on the landing, I could see General Akhtar's bodyguards who were facing off against our guys with their rifles at the low ready. Walked into the office, so it was just my interpreter and I, and the office is now full of people. And it was a long, narrow office, and the general was sitting at the head at his desk. And so I went up, close to the head of the table, and Weiss, my interpreter, and I sat down. I was directly across from my counterpart, my Afghan counterpart, and General Akhtar was about 3 or 4 people down to my right. And I just kind of said, what's going on? And that's when they said, well, we're here to advise General Akhtar of his rights. Would you do that? I'm like, that's not my job.
Not it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, And I'm looking at Colonel Kareem was his name, and I looked at him. I'm kind of giving him the head nod, like, remember we practiced this. And I'm talking to Weiss, and Weiss, my interpreter, saying he doesn't want to do it. And so I found myself leaning forward in my chair and looking to my right and advising this 1-star Afghan general that he was accused of an assault, advising him what his rights were. If he understood them, and of course he's going on and he's all pissed and angry, and it was just this very surreal moment as I became consciously aware that I had folded my arms, because like I said, I carried a 9mm, I carried it in a shoulder holster. Uh-huh. I'm right-handed, and I remember folding my arms, and my hand was on my 9mm. I unstrapped the safety strap, and I was ready to pull out my weapon because I literally thought that we were going to have a firefight. I thought that it was going to go south quickly, and I needed to be ready. And I was talking to a friend of mine who was a law enforcement officer, and he brought his ASP with him, the thing that you extend and you can apply physical force. And he said what he had done is he had straightened out his leg, he pulled his ASP out and had extended it down the length of his leg because he too thought that we were going to get physical and have to go hands-on. But Akhtar eventually calmed down, and we told him we're going to take him to custody now, and thankfully everything worked out. But that was, again, one of those surreal moments that I never would have imagined that what I would do is have to advise a 1-star general, the Afghan military, that he was being taken into custody.
My gosh.
Possibly pulling my weapon.
Did you have sweat in your boots on that one? Yeah. I think that's maybe, forget the humidity. I got sweat in my shoes. I'm not even there.
Yeah.
Oh, man. So, I mean, this is real, right? Yeah. Like, you're in a country that wasn't the norm.
No.
Like, you were honestly teaching law and order and democracy and civil rights.
Right. Oh, absolutely. I mean, it was one of my junior JAG officers, junior JAG, that sounds funny, but he was stationed in another camp, he had a similar experience. I had to take one of the senior officers into custody for raping his young driver. And this officer, after he was taken into custody, took out a contract on my officer's life. And so for a period of weeks, my JAG officer had a bodyguard going with him wherever he went because his contract was taken out on his life because we were trying to enforce the rule of law.
Wow. How did that experience, like all of that, you get through it? Did that change you? Like, how did you come home?
Really grateful. You don't go through that without being changed. You have a new appreciation for the rights and the freedoms, the freedom to protest, the freedom to, say things, the freedom to trash talk, your elected leaders, to protest against the police, that would never be tolerated over there. And just be grateful for little things. Cold water coming out of the tap.
Yeah.
Flush toilets. We have a flawed system. We're not perfect, but we're pretty dang good compared to what I saw there. what I experienced.
Yeah, I mean, that right there, I think is so cool. This podcast is all about perspective, right? And what you just explained right there, your experience is unique from probably everyone listening to this podcast, and that changes the way you think and feel and live your life. Now, in the political debate, I remember in, the 2008 election, 12, it was always like, bring our troops home. What are we doing in the Middle East? Like, get out of Afghanistan, get out of Iraq. Did you feel like you were wasting your time? Did you feel, should we have even been there? What are your thoughts looking back now?
No, we absolutely needed to be there. As I said, under the Taliban, girls couldn't go to school. People were persecuted. People were murdered. I heard stories of people just disappearing in the middle of the night. So we absolutely had to be there. And I understand, wanting to bring our troops home and why is it our fight, but what we were bringing to these people is invaluable. We would go on humanitarian missions and take food and clothing and school supplies into orphanages and to schools and to medical clinics because we realized, we needed to win the hearts and minds of the people.
So cool.
But what, let me share a story with you and everybody out there as to why we were there. As I said, during my ACTAR story, is I also mentored the legal officer on another base, the Kabul Military Training Center, KMTC. It's like the Afghan Army's boot camp. And so I got to know Colonel Khalik. And I have a picture of him hanging in my office at home, in my office at work, because I never want to forget him. But in the picture, he's very stoic. He's not smiling. And he looks, very severe. But he is the most amazing man, I think, that I have ever known. There's a twinkle in his eye. He is quick to smile. There's just this incredible spirit about him. And as I got to know my Afghan counterparts, I would always ask them what it was like living under the Taliban. What was it like living under Russia? And the stories that I heard were just, terrifying. Things that you would think that you would see in a fictional movie that really happened. And so I asked Colonel Khalik one day, I was by myself, my paralegal wasn't with me. And I asked him, what it was like living under the Russians. And he said, "Oh, Colonel, I wish you could come home with me and see where I grew up. I have this farm and it's beautiful." And I'm thinking, okay, this is kind of an odd way of, answering this question. Yeah. But he quickly got to it. He said, when the Russians invaded his country, he just said, "Inshallah." That means God willing. He just thought it was God's will that the Russians were there. And so he really didn't do anything, say anything, until the Russians came to his village. And the soldiers were chasing down and trapped 8 young girls in a woodshed there in their village. Instead of going in and pulling them out and doing whatever, they set fire to this woodshed and burned these 8 girls alive. And so there's a small shrine in his village. And of course I'm just thinking, geez, how do you live through that? But his story just got worse. And he said that's when he realized it wasn't God's will that Russia, be in his country and treat the people this way. And so he began to speak out. He was in the military, but began to speak out and became a vocal opponent. And he was taken into custody. And he was beaten and tortured. At one point, he held out his middle finger towards me and put it on the desk. And I looked at my interpreter. I knew he wasn't flipping me off. But I looked at my interpreter and I said, "I'm not sure what he wants." And he says, "He wants you to feel his finger." And so I reached out and I felt his finger, and there was a definite ridge of scar tissue underneath his fingernail. And I'm thinking, okay. And he said that one of these torture sessions, they had attached electrodes to his feet and his hands and were electrocuting him. And he passed out from the pain. And he was laying on the floor. And the interrogator, one of the soldiers, had a steel plate on the heel of his boot stomped on his finger, twisting his heel, and ripped the fingernail out of his finger. And that's where he got this scar tissue from. And I'm just in horror. And he just keeps telling me things. He said, if you don't know this already, for Middle Eastern men, being able to grow facial hair is a sign that, you're a man, that you can take care of a family, you can be responsible and whatnot. And so mustache, facial hair is very important to Afghan men. And where he was being held, it was, I think, in a soccer stadium or near where there was a soccer field. And, they didn't give them the dignity of toilets. And so they had to go out onto this field to relieve themselves. And he said one day he looked down and saw a mustache laying in the dirt. And he recognized the mustache, that it had belonged to, somebody that he knew. And the mustache was, attached to a lip, which had been cut off this man's face and just discarded out in the field. And he looked at me and he says, I was just grateful that I still had my mustache on my face. And we got interrupted about that point, and I had to leave. And we came back the next day or two, and I asked Colonel Colleague, I said, would you please, share this with Sergeant LeBaron, my paralegal. And so he started in, but he began the story a little bit differently this time. And he said, started talking about and reminiscing about his daughter. And of course, I hadn't heard about a daughter. And he said, if she were alive, she would be, approximately this age, and she'd have children, and I'd have grandkids. And again, I'm just thinking, where are you going with this story? And he said, when he was taken into custody by the Russians, is they had grabbed his 11-year-old daughter, she was 11 at the time, and brought her out in front of him and doused her in cooking oil and burned her in front of him. And I remember sitting there in his office just thinking, I was just horrified, and it was just silent. Even my interpreter was shocked. And, I looked at him and I said, Colonel Khalik, I don't understand. You are this incredibly happy, optimistic man. I said, I just feel this light coming from you, and I feel better when I am around you. I said, why are you like this? I said, with everything that has happened to you, and that's, there were other things that happened under the Taliban, and with just these horrible, horrible things that happened to him. I looked at him in the eye and I said, why are you so positive? Why are you still in the military? Why are you the man that you are? And he looked at me and he said, Colonel Church, I am this way because of you, because of what you represent, what you and the United States military are bringing to my country. And I've never forgotten that. And it's like I said, I have a picture of he and I. I'm smiling, he's not. And it's an 8x10 framed in my office, both of my offices, so that I will never forget him. I tried to stay in touch with him, but, he didn't have a computer, and it was hard to stay in touch. So I don't know whatever happened to him, but I will never forget him.
Wow. That's perspective.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, I think, how many colleagues were there?
Right.
That's one story of who knows how many. And, we've talked about, anyone that listens to this podcast knows, I love this country. Yeah. I love America. I'm so grateful that I'm born here. I think you feel the same way, obviously. And, we've talked about where much is given, much is required. Mm-hmm. And having that ability to be able to stand for good in the world,
right,
stand for democracy, stand for freedom. When things like that happen, there are very few other countries or organizations out there that can make a stand. Are we perfect? No.
Of course not.
Are there things that we would have done different? And hindsight's 20/20
absolutely.
For sure. But I think what you said right there just encapsulates this feeling of things are complicated,
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes we've got to step in and do what's right, as Americans, and more importantly, as people.
Yeah. You know, we, even now, 14 years later, it's sometimes easy to forget just the horrors and the atrocity and what's happening in Afghanistan and in other parts of the world. And it's like I said, that's why I have his picture on my wall, is to serve as a constant reminder that we are truly blessed, and that we really have something that we can offer the rest of the world.
Yeah, man, that's fantastic. Thanks so much for sharing that story. And that's the type of things that I hope all of us surround ourselves more with, to be more informed, to be more educated. Is there anything you'd like to leave the listeners with, or anything you want to say in closing?
I want to give a shout out to my wife. I would not have had the career that I've had without her love and her support, and to my family. You know, what's so cool is when I'm on a drill weekend. So in the Guard, that's what we do, is we have duty 1 weekend a month and 2 weeks a year. And so when I'm out in the community and I'm in my uniform and I have little kids that come up and, you know, want to shake my hand, or we will be out to eat and somebody will have paid our tab. You know, I so appreciate that, because they're recognizing, excuse me, sorry, I didn't mean to get emotional, you know, who we are and what we do. And that is so awesome. But it's our wives and husbands who really are the true heroes that have to be at home and have to deal with all of the crap, you know, that we don't have to put up with because we're not there. And so when you thank a soldier for their service, tell them to thank their wives, thank their husbands. So,
wow, that's pretty cool little advice out there. Shout out to Janae. I know you're watching. Janae is awesome, and you two are a power couple. So, hey, thanks so much for doing this. I appreciate it. I hope you've enjoyed this conversation. I end every episode the same way, and I know you have a voice, so don't pretend like you're just going to be a spectator now. Take your drink. I'll start. Clowns to the left me, jokers to the right. Here I am, stuck in the middle with you. There we go. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.